Her name was Monica. She was 23 years old and most beautiful, with a killer body structure. I met her during the first year of my postgraduate studies. Since our college didn't provide hostels, I rented a flat with a friend in a nearby apartment. Coincidentally, Monica's house was right next to ours. Our balconies were interestingly positioned. Her roadside balcony formed a right angle with ours, and only a thin wall separated our kitchen balconies. Within just a few days of moving in, I noticed that her study room window aligned perfectly with the window of my room. One night, while I was lying awake, I saw her studying late into the night. With the lights in my room turned off, I found myself watching her quietly. She shifted positions now and then, adjusting her posture as she focused on her books. When she realized that the entire neighborhood was asleep, a certain calmness seemed to take over her. She leaned back in her chair, exhaled deeply, and ran her hand across her waist as if relieving the stress from a long day. Her movements were slow, almost soothing, like she was unwinding after hours of study. After a few minutes, she packed up her books and prepared for bed. I remained by my window, captivated by the grace with which she moved. As she adjusted her clothes, the hem of her shirt lifted slightly, revealing a glimpse of her navel and slender waist. It was an accidental moment, yet it felt oddly intimate. Watching her like this, I couldn't help but feel a growing curiosity. There was something about her, an elegance, a mystery that pulled me in. From that night, I made up my mind. I would find a way to get to know her better and become her friend. The next evening, I noticed Monica sitting in her room near the roadside balcony, immersed in her studies. I stood in my own balcony, casually glancing her way. Our eyes met for brief moments. There was a quiet curiosity in the way she looked at me, and I found myself smiling slightly, hoping she wouldn't mind the attention. After exchanging a few more glances, she shifted her posture slightly, leaning forward as she adjusted her book. The subtle movement revealed a glimpse of her neckline, drawing my gaze without warning. There was a natural grace to her, and in that moment, the soft contours of her form seemed to captivate me entirely. It wasn't just about her appearance. There was a quiet charm in her presence, something that made it hard to look away. She noticed my lingering gaze, but didn't seem to mind. A few moments later, I smiled, and to my surprise, she stepped out onto her balcony, standing just across from me. I took the chance to strike up a conversation, asking her about her college and some general things. She responded warmly, and though the exchange was brief, it left me with a sense that there was potential for more between us. The next morning, I woke up early, determined to see her again. I reached the bus stand ahead of time, waiting with an eager excitement. About half an hour later, she arrived, looking as calm and composed as ever. We boarded the bus together and traveled to her college. After she went inside, I strolled over to a nearby garden, deciding to wait for her. To my surprise, she returned earlier than expected, and we spent the rest of the afternoon together in that quiet garden, talking and sharing little pieces of our lives. There was a comfortable ease between us, as if we had known each other longer than just a day. Before parting ways, she promised to meet me again in 2 days. I couldn't wait for the next evening, feeling that this was just the beginning of something meaningful. During our next meeting, we strolled through the garden, enjoying each other's company. As we reached a dimly lit corner, I felt a surge of emotion and gently pulled her closer. Without a word, I leaned in and kissed her. The kiss deepened, and in that moment, It felt like the world around us faded away. My hands instinctively traced the contours of her back, holding her as our connection intensified. I could feel the softness of her touch, the warmth of her skin beneath my fingertips. As I held her close, I could sense her heartbeat quickening. There was a tension between us, both exhilarating and tender. After a moment, we pulled away, our breaths uneven. Neither of us spoke right away, but the look in her eyes said everything. As we walked back home together, Monica hinted at finding a more private place where we could spend time without interruptions. I shared a plan that had been on my mind. Since it was summer, her parents and brother usually slept on the terrace at night. I suggested sneaking down to her study room through the balcony by the kitchen. We could meet there, away from any prying eyes. She hesitated, concerned about the risk. Her elder brother's room was nearby, and she feared he might notice us. I reassured her, suggesting she close the door leading to the roadside balcony. That way, her brother wouldn't be able to enter her study room or suspect anything. That night, as planned, her brother returned home around 11 p.m., had dinner, and went up to the terrace to sleep. Everything seemed to be falling into place. That night, I watched from my window as Monica sat in her study room. It was clear she was struggling to concentrate, glancing around with a restlessness that mirrored my own. After a few moments, she stood up, walked over to close the balcony door, and then looked toward me, giving a subtle nod, a silent invitation. Feeling my pulse quicken, I took a deep breath and quietly climbed down to her. Kitchen side balcony. The door was left ajar, and I slipped inside. We stood facing each other, the room filled with a tense, shared excitement. Monica's breathing was unsteady, and I could see the rapid rise and fall of her chest. I reached out, took her hand, and gently pulled her closer, our bodies almost touching. Leaning in, I kissed her softly at first, then with more intensity as the moment grew. She returned the kiss with equal fervor, and we found ourselves lost in the connection. The air between us was charged, and as the seconds passed, our excitement grew. I traced my hands gently along her back, savoring the warmth of her skin. As the moment deepened, I helped her slip out of her nightwear, and she responded by unbuttoning my shirt and loosening my pants. I carried her carefully to the bed, where we lay down together. There was a sense of urgency in our actions, but also a tenderness that made every touch feel significant. I could see the longing in her eyes, and with every movement, we seemed to draw closer emotionally as well as physically. I held her close, letting my fingers trace slow circles along her skin, exploring the places that made her shiver with anticipation. She responded passionately, and before long, she reached a peak of emotion, her whole body trembling as she found release. As the moment deepened, Monica reached out, touching me with a boldness that both surprised and excited me. There was an undeniable chemistry between us, and the way we explored each other felt natural, like we were discovering a new kind of closeness together. I gently guided her onto the bed, and she responded with an eager look, drawing me closer. As I leaned in, she wrapped her legs around my waist, pulling me toward her with a sense of longing. I moved slowly at first, allowing us both to adjust to the rhythm of the moment. Our movements soon synchronized, creating a connection that felt both physical and emotional. With every touch and every motion, the intensity between us grew. Her grip on my waist tightened as she reached a peak of pleasure, her body trembling in release. I followed close behind, lost in the moment, and with a final movement, we both found release together. It felt as though time had stopped for those few seconds, the world outside fading into the background. We stayed close, our breathing gradually slowing and sinking, our hearts still pounding. From the shared experience, I could feel her body relax, her soft curves molding against mine, as we lay in silence, savoring the warmth of the moment. We stayed like that for a while, simply enjoying each other's presence. That night, we found ourselves returning to each other again and again, exploring new ways to connect, each moment more intimate than the last. It was as if time didn't exist, and we were in our own little world. The closeness we shared that night became something of a tradition, a secret bond between us. Every other night, when the house was quiet, we'd find our way to each other, seeking those private moments where nothing else mattered but the two of us.